Hi, I'm Mdev0's, and this is Last Unrifled Yaw. Last Unrifled Yaw is a podcast where we have conversations about video art, experimental music, avant-garde literature, performance art, and the occult. If you or someone you know would like to be on Last Unrifled Yaw, please get in touch. This time on Last Unrifled Yaw, we have Mdev0, who is an indie game developer who makes small art games that collectively partake in a Gnostic mythos that they've written. We'll talk more about this and the mythos as we go through today's episode. Hi, this is Mdev0's, and today we have Mdev0. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, Mdev0?
I'm a game developer in general, kind of mixed media artist. I've been developing games for longer than I can remember, and it's the kind of thing that if I didn't do it, I think I would just die. But my most successful on most metrics project is the Brainstorm series. Brainstorm 2 came out a bit ago, and I'm quite happy with that. It's surreal and excessively loud, both visually and auditorially.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that in a minute. What is it that led you to want to design games of this sort?
I think there's always been an interest to me in the edge between art and interactivity. Like, I remember going to art museums as a child, and there being those rooms where they would just like play a video, and it was like dark, and you would just watch a video. And I always remember thinking that I was supposed to be doing something in those rooms, and you aren't. You're just supposed to watch the video. But what if you could? And that sort of art game general place where I'm most comfortable.
All right, yeah, that makes sense. I could really see how that fits into your type of, I guess they're games. Some of them are a little bit like, some of them are games. Some of them are more like walking simulators. How would you describe them to someone that has not yet seen your itch page?
So there's kind of a current ongoing debate about games as art. I make art as games. That's my kind of like neat little box that I want to fit into. That the process of playing a game is essential to the experience, and you can't like analyze it without considering the fact that it's a game. But it is art. Art as games.
All right, yeah, that makes sense. Which of your games, which of your pieces would you most like to talk about first?
I think Brainstormed is probably the most direct in its themes. That's also probably the work I'm most proud of.
Okay, Brainstormed or Brainstorm 2?
Oh, Brainstorm 2.
Brainstorm 2. Okay. I'm on the itch page now, and it says there's like some trippy glitch art that's highly variable in the types that it is. And it says it's a downloadable psycho-spiritual voyage for Windows. What is it exactly? And there's a book that goes with it too, right? Well, it's like 17 pages.
Yeah, I made a, I guess booklet. Yeah, I always love. Have you ever read the Have a Nice Life Death Consciousness booklet?
I have not. I've listened to the album, but I didn't know about the booklet.
With the CD and vinyl releases, they released basically just like a manifesto about a made-up not political figure, made-up prophet from like the 1700s that espoused nihilism and some great. It's a big Death Consciousness is a big inspiration if you can find where you're looking for. But yeah, there's the multimedia aspect that the booklet, the Book of None, which is an in-universe religious text. There are several references to back and forth throughout the games, and I think the correct experience is to read the Book of, play some Brainstormed, read the Book of None, play some more Brainstormed, because there are like specific coordinates listed in the Book of None to go to.
Oh yeah, I honestly, the way I approach that game for anyone that's listening is it's you kind of type in coordinates and it takes you to what is like a digital installation art piece, like a location, and you can sort of like fly around, at least on some of them. And honestly, I was kind of lost, so I just wandered a bit, but I didn't even know, I didn't think to look for coordinates in the book.
Um, yeah, wandering is definitely one of the experiences I wanted. One of the big inspirations, and this was the inspiration for Brainstorm 1 that I kind of failed to achieve, and then tried again in Brainstorm 2, is the like Minecraft Infinity update, the April Fools that they came out with a while ago, where it was procedurally generated random dimensions, and that concept of like procedural generation without like limits, like procedural generation, oh, you've got some terrain, but the terrain is going to look pretty much the same as handmade terrain. That's the point. Like procedural generation that's just, oh yes, let's put 50 penguins in this room. So I believe I've listed on the itch page, I don't quite remember the exact number, a
998,001 procedurally generated worlds.
yes, if you there are over 50 worlds that are placed and coded by me specifically, and then I built an engine to generate the rest.
Okay. So what was your process like in trying to make this thing? Or how did you conceive? I guess we sort of talked about what inspired it, but how did you go from your original inspiration to making this thing?
I guess in a way we'll have to talk about Brainstorm 1 first then.
Okay.
Brainstorm 1 was weird. I made it at a very weird time in my life, and it just happened to be pretty good, I think. But it was just kind of like the first thing I made that like really clicked. Like it's kind of impossible to talk about like what Brainstorm 1 like was, because it just, I don't know, I just made it in like a fugue state. And Brainstorm 2 is kind of exploring that, both, sequel, how do you make a sequel to Brainstormed, which isn't quite as big a topic because, Brainstormed isn't some famous game that's got rave reviews, but to me, in my mind, it's important. Just that idea of following things up and apotheosis. Wait, did I pronounce that right?
I think so, like becoming a god.
The highest point in something, in development of something. Yeah.
Okay. Could you elaborate on the Book of None? It's got 33 verses. A lot of them are just like one sentence or maybe a paragraph. The first one's maybe like a page and a half. And you got like Enoch and Seth and the Library of Babel. Like there are overtly Gnostic themes throughout some of the games and definitely in this book.
Yes. Gnosticism is a big influence both in my work and kind of personal life. I was kind of the stereotypical queer traumatized Christian for a while, that just like, ooh, church is bad because my experience with it was bad, and religion is bad in general. And then Gnosticism was, kind of to start the edgy counterculture, but also there's a lot of good messages there, I think. And
yeah,
sure if I'm
so there's a wide variety of Gnosticism, but yeah.
Not sure if I'm still kind of believe that, but it's definitely still an influence on my work. The Book of None is, so the 33 verses. I actually had to like make what's essentially filler, the very short ones, to get to the 33 mark, because the kind of numerology of Brainstormed is pretty important. But yes, the Seth, Enoch, and Seth and Enoch are both part of the vivisection, which is the kind of period in the mythos and the lore where it's the end of the Brainstormed and the period before the next Brainstormed. So after Brainstormed 1, but before Brainstorm 2. And that's where Hypnosumer takes place. But I don't really like Hypnosumer. I kind of made that. That was made during COVID, and it was bad. But the Library of Babel is another big inspiration in general because do you actually know the Library of Babel?
Yeah, and for anyone listening, it's like an infinitely large library that has every possible combination of letters. So theoretically, everything you could write in whatever language exists. It's just most of the books are scrambled nonsense. And I think there's even like a website you can go to.
Yes, there is a website.
Yeah.
It's all based on a short story by, I don't know how to pronounce his name, George Luis Borges.
Borges, yeah.
And he's a fascist, but his work is pretty good.
I did not know that about him.
Yeah, but the website is very good, and there's I actually ran some little things on my Discord where I would give like the code to a Library of Babel book, and then you could go there and like read some lore. That procedural generation and the codes to kind of things. The Library of Babel actually does appear in Brainstormed 1, but it's very hard to get to, and is mostly just kind of more of the same of screaming noises and a bunch of bright colors. The Library of Babel in Brainstorm 2, which in the lore is the reconstructed Library of Babel, I'm very proud of. There's the kind of bird servitor race, and then the links to each of the three goddesses.
How does numerology fit in?
Numerology, I don't actually know exactly where it started. I've always just liked numbers. Like, I just like when things line up. Like, that's just nice to me that when things fit into patterns like that. And in Brainstormed 1, I wanted to make an ARG, but I didn't really know how to make an ARG, and I wanted to do like lore and a thing. So I just typed 1, 2, 4, 3, 6 everywhere and went, this has meaning. It didn't have meaning. It absolutely didn't. But in Brainstorm 2, it does. And silence is 111, wonder is 222, and love is 333. And the kind of I'm forgetting what it's called. Trinity. The Trinity is very important there, and that aligns with a lot of things, like obviously the Holy Trinity, and
you also have like a gi ga ga thing that's like, is that
yes,
mother, father, son?
Those are the same. It's it's the kind of thing where, like, in my mind, this lore is exceedingly clear, and I'm giving out all the hints in the world, but it's incredibly complicated, actually, and quite convoluted. So, Gi, Ga, and Ge are the masks that Silence, Wonder, and Love, respectively, are forced into during the vivisection.
And then, so the vivisection, what is the vivisection?
The vivisection is the destruction of the first Brainstormed by Ge using the... Wait, actually, I might be misquoting my own lore, which I feel really bad about, just because the names are all dumb. I think
That's
it's
all right.
it might be Ga. Give me a second.
GE is the son, if I understand correctly. And then GA is the father, GI is the mother.
Oh yeah, Ga. Um, is,
Silence is the ender of vivisection.
yeah, Ga um, is. It's actually really, really kind of a complicated topic. What Ga was feeling and like their role as both a villain and protagonist, but in a general sense, it's apathetic and discontent with their world. Um, and so they use the Library of Babel to force everything to have a name and a form. So, like in the brainstormed before, if everything's just kind of in flux constantly, and there's, there's a bunch of objects just kind of flying around, but after that, it was forced into distinct forms and names, and that's bad. Yeah, it's kind of like the kind of thing where I can't really elaborate on why I think that's bad. It's just one of my values.
It kind of sounds like the demiurge, like the
Yes,
Gnostic deity that created physical reality, not like creating existence, but creating like matter. And
yes,
that is normally not a great guy, depending on the kind of Gnosticism we're talking about.
yes. The Gnosticism specifically is a big influence on that because also Ga isn't like Ga specifically isn't the villain. You know, uh, metaphorically, they do represent a part of me uh, who, is self-destructive because the vivisection hurts them as well. And so the vivisection happens, and basically everybody goes insane, but Ga specifically gets really messed up and loses their memories and becomes Enoch. And that's the kind of start of Thea Event, which is a game that I haven't haven't even begun developing yet, but I do have the plot for.
Yeah, it's referenced in one of them. Is that the Hello Jenny? I think it mentions it in there.
Yeah, Hello Jenny mentions that. The Then some stuff happens, which is spoilers for Thea Event that I'm not going to go into, and Enoch splits into three again, into Enoch, Metatron, Nar, and that's NA''AR, which is, I don't actually remember where that comes from specifically, but it's relevant to the Torah in some way. I think it's another name for Enoch. But yes, Metatron, who is, if we're going to point to a villain, probably one of the main villains of the series.
That is interesting. Normally, people all sing the praises of Metatron.
Yeah,
What is Metatron in your series?
Metatron is the kind of culmination of that forcing names on things. If you think about it as the Library of Babel is the kind of fountain of forms and names, and the vivisection is forcing things to have a distinct form and name, not allowing them to change, then being a heavenly scribe is kind of the ultimate act of that.
Hmm, that makes sense. Especially if you think about like Kabbalistic ideas of writing things in Hebrew, literally creating them.
Yes, I actually am not by raising at least, but by blood, and my grandfather, who I'm great friends with, Jewish, and he's a big influence on my life, both artistically and just like value wise.
Hmm.
But that forcing of names is so bad that it doesn't allow people to die. Like, you can't die and your soul move on because you're stuck in that body. But you don't. That doesn't mean immortality. That just means you turn into like a horrible zombie and are suffering. And so Enoch, who is still vaguely conscious, realizes this is bad and creates a homunculus out of a man, and that homunculus is Samiel, which is, for anyone that doesn't know, one of the names of the Gnostic demiurge. And it's very specific. I very specifically made it so that Samiel isn't the one who creates reality; he's the one that destroys it. But also, it's a little more complicated than that. So Samiel, not going to go into too much of the plot of Tragedy of Samiel because that's also still not out yet. But he kills basically everyone, like, super permanently, so their souls can move on. And then goes to fight Metatron. And actually, I'm not sure whether or not I should say this, because it is spoilers for Tragedy of Samiel, but I do want to...
Don't give out any spoilers. Now, this probably won't be out for 5 or 6 months, but don't spoil anything.
Yeah. And they fight. And the kind of true cause of Enoch's and God's suffering is revealed. And it is the aptly named but kind of amorphous war. And it's... War, to me, is kind of a personification of apathy. That is, I think, that was the greatest evil in my life at the time of writing this. And war drove Ga to start the vivisection, and now is corrupting Samiel. And this causes Samiel to create a new world, even with even less skill than Metatron, and kind of fill it with the husks and vague forms of everything as they are starting to just break down. And that's Hypnosumer. That kind of wasteland you explore is what Samiel has made. And Gi, which is silence forced into a mask. And also my icon, my profile picture on pretty much everything.
All right.
Then gathers up the materials of this world and destroys Samiel, and finally, and that starts the second brainstorm and releases everyone from their masks. And it's not quite a happy ending there, but I think it's like the brainstorm 2 is a much more optimistic game than Hypnosumer, which I think is reasonable given the times they were produced. But
yeah, Hypnosumer was during COVID lockdowns.
Brainstorm 2 is, again, very vague because it's just kind of explorative. But if you really follow everything, you can find war, and you can find the kind of form it's taking on right now, which is Judge. And Judge is an extended Blood Meridian reference, because I really like Blood Meridian.
The novel?
Yes. Um, I just love that book. It's it's really messed up, but I think it's very introspective on the nature of violence and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I really need to read some Cormac McCarthy. I just haven't gotten around to it. Now, I have to ask, are you familiar with William Blake at all?
Oh, I do not think I am.
Your work reminds me a lot of what he was doing, except like 300, no, 200 years ago, in that he he kind of merged stuff from his present day life, including like events in his own life and people he knew, with like Old Testament mythology, pretty much, and
Oh, that is
produced like prophetic inscribed poems that like go on about Enoch and like different angels, and there's a personification of war who's actually America. Like all the, not all of them, a lot of different countries become personified as characters that are like sort of gods.
that's yeah, that is pretty much exactly what I do.
It's like the same genre at least, except you're doing like art video games, and he was doing like maybe some of the epic poems are like 10 pages, some of them are more like 50, but like heavily illustrated.
Yeah. I'll have to check them out after this podcast. But yeah, that's a kind of, and I'm leaving things out in that explanation on purpose because spoilers, but that's the kind of like textual what's going on in my work. But there is also the metatextual and the metaphorical very heavily and kind of interwoven. As I said earlier, pretty much everything, no, not pretty much everything, literally everything in the brainstormed is representative of my kind of mental state and aspects of that. And the third title, because I really like titling things. It's actually a Vonnegut reference. You know how like Slaughterhouse 5 has like 6 titles to it. Brainstorm 2, Death is Not the End, or Hyperphantasia. That hyperphantasia is that I didn't hallucinate it, but I did vividly imagine it as if it was real. Most of the events and things you see in Brainstorm 2.
I gotcha. Could you talk a little bit more about hyperphantasia?
So hyperphantasia is a not really a condition. I guess it's a symptom, but it's just kind of a thing. It's the your mental image, like the kind of mind's eye, or like if you try to picture something, is much more vivid and much realer feeling than it is on average.
I gotcha.
Like the kind of common test is you tell someone to imagine an apple, and if you have aphantasia, which is the opposite of that, you can't picture an apple. You can picture its properties and you can picture its traits. And I actually think there's something to be gained to that as well. But most people you will see a red apple. That's the kind of level of fidelity they could get just at normal. But I can picture an apple and picture its textures and its reflections and it position it in 3D space and like update it to lighting in my room and move it around. Which sounds like, oh my god, this is, a creative superpower. But the problem is, I'm not going to be able to stop imagining that apple for about 30 minutes. It's just kind of stuck. It's just kind of stuck in my vision right now.
All right, I guess the apple is in the room now.
Yeah. And so the kind of chaos of Brainstorm 2 and how to me it feels weirdly claustrophobic, like especially compared to Brainstormed 1. That's definitely on purpose. And to kind of represent the mental state I feel most of the time.
Hmm. You feel claustrophobic a lot of the time?
Not I kind of misphrased that. Not a lot of the time, but during uh, during those, I call them visions. That's just fun. I like calling them visions. It's it does kind of feel like there's pressure. I don't actually. I have no hallucinations. Like I don't have psychosis, obviously, but I do get like physical sensations sometimes.
Are you comfortable with describing them? I'm always curious about hallucinations and altered states of consciousness. And if it makes you feel any better, William Blake had visions of angels. They told him things that he wrote down, which I think is
Yeah,
awesome as long as you aren't doing things that mess up your life and you can
yeah,
distinguish that, like, yeah, that was a vision. You know?
yeah. So the most common thing is just kind of a pressure that I feel whenever I'm like really experiencing something. But the I also will occasionally feel like pain, um, and that's specifically like linked to something. Like there's a recurring vision of crucifixion that I was very intentional. There's only one crucifix in the entirety of Brainstorm 2, because if I didn't put that rule, there would be one in every scene. Oh, but yeah, I can just feel like pressure and a little bit of pain on the center of my palms, and it like it's the same kind of feeling as an itch, where it's not like originating from anywhere. It's just kind of there, but it is. Yeah, it's painful.
That's interesting. Hopefully, you're not developing stigmata.
No, my visually in terms of actual actual life, I'm my hands are fine. The aspects of Brainstorm, like the goddesses specifically, Silence, Wonder, Love, are portions of myself. And when I'm having a vision and when I'm imagining things, I it was very frequent for me at the time to specifically like imagine one of or more multiple of the goddesses specifically speaking on the topic. Like they're this is a really weird metaphor, but it's the most like descriptive way to describe it. I don't have dissociative identity disorder, but if you imagine that as like a skill tree, I have a side grade to that.
I gotcha. I take it that you don't identify as an occultist?
Um, uh, like spiritually and stuff like that. My current kind of philosophy is active agnosticism, which is kind of funny to be an agnostic Gnostic, but basically the same kind of setup as agnosticism, that we can't prove or objectively prove or disprove spirituality, because obviously they're two separate fields of objectivity and spirituality. But believing in things is pretty good for the human like mind. Like that's really soothing to some people. And so it doesn't really matter whether or not, you know, what I'm doing actually has any effect on the real world, because it makes me happy. And, you know, even through placebo or just that making me happy, it does have an effect on the world.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like there's a form of occultism that you may or may not have heard of called chaos magic,
Yes.
where the basic idea, so you do know, but for anyone listening, it's you consciously choose to believe things for the benefits or utility of those beliefs, as opposed to whether or not they're true.
Yes.
Um, and just thinking of, you described it as like dissociative identity skill tree, where you don't go off the deep end. And for me, that sounds a lot like just working with entities in general. If you invoke or evoke something and you are successful, there is definitely another thing that you can converse with, whether or not it's like a part of your own psyche or something external, who knows? You can certainly induce that experience.
Yes. And that fragmentation sounds scary and bad, but that like I like to think of it like fragmented, like a stained glass window is, where it's still a window and it will still. Actually, I don't know if stained glass windows are more fragile than normal windows. That's not important to this metaphor. It still functions as one single pane of glass would, but the light shines through in different colors, and I can explore ideas and kind of their singularity by giving it a character and personality.
Yeah, for sure. And the other extreme um, isn't necessarily great to get stuck in either. Like if you are always stuck in a state of like everything is one, the whole world is me, I am the whole world, and just like pure love, bliss, all is one stuff, you don't end up doing anything because like
Yeah,
you are everything already. You're doing everything.
yeah, that kind of contrast is. I'm not sure if it's important to my work, but it's something I like to explore. Um, it's definitely not central, but it is a theme I like. That, like, to me, Buddhism and to a lesser extent Taoism, but they. Oh, and preface: I'm not an expert on Buddhism or Taoism. Take everything I say with a grain of salt. They come very close to the right conclusion, and then just kind of peter out of like we got there, you know, the game's over. We won, and that kind of finality doesn't really sit right with me. That, like, yeah, life and wanting things are suffering, but I kind of like suffering. Just kind of not in like a generalized sense, not a specific sense. Like that want of things is part of being alive, and you can opt to not play the game. I'm not gonna call you lesser for it, but I want things.
Uh, do you have any questions for me?
You actually am interested in your specific beliefs. You mentioned entities and evoking things,
Hmm.
but yeah, what's your specific beliefs?
Um,
Go into that a little bit.
I identify as a chaos magician, meaning that I don't get too attached to any specific beliefs. Um, I do have theories, so I do actively practice magic, and I have theories about how they work, but I'm not overly committed to them. I guess like the main thing that I think about currently is if the universe is composed of flows of information, there are things that you can do that will align you more with certain flows of information over others. And if you do so wisely, you can perform rituals, do actions, think things, feel things, whatever, that move you in line with information flows, like galaxy spanning information flows, culture spanning information flows, just like your immediate social circle, all of it, such that you ride those currents into places that hopefully are closer to where you want to be. But
Yeah,
that's
that's
pretty abstract.
that's really interesting because it does perfectly hit that line of like, even even if you're just a guy like being schizophrenic in his room, you're still. Oh, and I use guy in a gender neutral sense. Sorry,
That's cool.
personal lexicon. You're still correct. Like, at the cultural level, those information flows are real, and that's so we've already got the backing of objective reality. Why not get silly with it?
Yeah. And I think people dismiss subjective reality way too much when our lives are just as much subjective as they are objective. I mean, at least in terms of my experience, but then again, my experience is inherently subjective. So
Yeah,
being able to manipulate that through whatever means is certainly a useful skill.
yeah. That I think I think objectivity only exists as kind of a limit you can reach. Like, this is specifically using the math term. Like, you know how on an asymptomatic function, as it approaches infinity, it approaches like zero, or as
Yeah,
it
like if
approaches
it curves
infinity.
up really fast but never actually reaches there.
Yeah, that's that's kind of like human experience with objectivity to me. That it's a useful conception to have. Like, it's useful to go, yes, there is objective good in the world. You know, I'm good. But it's also, I think, important to recognize that you aren't at that limit because you aren't at infinity, and you're just doing your best approximation of that in the moment.
Yeah, I think you can only ever get so close. But again, that word you is doing a lot of work there because, like, the universe itself in all of its existence is objective. That is what is. But um, the me that is speaking is only like presumably it's some sort of emergent properties of the way that my body functions that causes a fracturing of the all mind, if you will, to experience things. But because it is experience, it's inherently subjective, so we can never really touch the noumenal world behind our perceptions.
Yeah. Oh, that thing you said earlier about not holding tightly to things and beliefs. That is kind of relevant because I'm kind of in the process of moving moving on from the brainstormed world and that kind of mythos. I feel like it's, obviously there are still 2 games left before it's completed, and maybe 3. I'm thinking about making Brainstorm 3, but if I do, it'll be small. So a couple more years probably of work, but then I'm moving on. And Silence, Wonder, and Love are not religious figures to me, but they're kind of religious. They're very of their time. They're of the time when I wrote the Book of None and made Brainstorm 2. And as I'm, moving on and growing and changing as a person, I'm finding new gods and new interesting ideas.
So you think you're not going to integrate those ideas into your old mythos? Is it like going to be a separate thing, or is it related? Or I'm curious. If you don't want to talk about it, it's fine.
I do want to talk about it. So, Hello Jenny, specifically. Um,
Yeah, you mentioned like the 2 to 3 year number in there.
Hello Jenny and I Am Blacklight. I Am Blacklight is basically just like a thing I made in panic. Like, I accidentally made a suicide note. I'm fine, guys. it was a bit, but those are specifically about uh, moving on from things, and I I am going to be done with Brainstormed 3, which I'm tentatively titling Goodbye Brainstormed. Will be about the kind of like ending of ending of things and integration of new things, but I'm not going to hold on to ideas that are 3 or 4 or 5 years old because they're old, and hold that transience is an important property of the brainstormed, and it'd be pretty Enochish of me to try to hold on to it too hard.
Yeah, I could see that. I'm just thinking about my own magical system that I've been working on for a few years now. Because what I did is I started with a grammar that can accept any magical symbols. And it's a language. You can speak it, you can write it, you can dance it, you can make music that communicates the same words. And I do wonder how long it'll keep going. But the idea is that because it's a grammar, you can plug anything you want into it. Kind of like you can plug anything you want into the Kabbalistic tree of life, and you can keep using it. So I hope that that'll keep it fresh. Like whenever you come up with new ideas and new things you want to work with, you can plug them into the language and then produce text and rituals.
I think it wouldn't be like in a way. I feel the same way about the brainstormed, in that it's just kind of representative of raw creativity and imagination. But I'm not focusing on that large field. And if you want to consider the next thing I make a story within the brainstormed and a kind of one distinct world, then you can do that.
What is brain? Are you using brainstormed as just like a title, or is there a thing, a brainstormed?
The brainstorm, I don't. It's the kind of thing of like I made so much lore by accident when I was younger and wasn't planning on it. Like I wasn't planning on there being a brainstorm 2 or hypnoseemer or anything. I made brainstormed 1, forgot about it, rediscovered it, and then all this happened. But the brainstorm is both literally and metatextually in my life a period of growth and change, and kind of like releasing of preconceived ideas, both you know of physical form. Like I think one of the things that's useful to believe objectivity. I have a stutter. Objectively, most of the time, is that I'm a human person, but I think that's still a belief, and in the brainstorm, that's let go of. And so, textually, it's just kind of like chaos-y, like primordial soup of ideas and souls. Uh, and metatextually, it's change, change and growth and creativity in my life.
Yeah, it makes sense that you wouldn't stay there forever.
Yeah, it is actually kind of like there's a little bit of stress because I do kind of have like a fixed time limit on how long I can care about and remember these ideas, and so I've got to make Tragedy of Samuel and the event in Brainstorm 3 like not quickly, but I do gotta like hustle and really put into it, because if I don't, then I'm going to keep moving on and have moved on completely before I finish them.
I gotcha. I think you can do it.
Yeah, I can make almost every aspect of my games myself except for the music. Have I don't have no musical ability, but my musical ability is much more noise music and generalized screaming than it is the kind of music I want to put in my games. And so I have to work with a lot of very creative and very talented people. Shout out to them.
Would you like to shout any of them out?
Oh yes, actually, shout out to them and them specifically. Prismatic Opal or Prismask Opal, fun name. Uh, Dreamscape Synopsis, Scum, which I don't know if you'll be able to find on YouTube, but if you search Scum Brainstormed, Hernando Valadez. That's the other guy, and they made pretty much all the music for Brainstorm 1 and 2. There's actually a lot of AI generated music in Brainstorm 2, which I don't know how to feel about, because it is procedurally generated, and that fits with the themes, but it also is kind of trash.
Yeah, AI music generation has been lagging behind the image generation. All right. Is there anything else you'd like to plug?
I guess just Tragedy of Samuel isn't coming out soon, but it's coming out soon enough.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.